Our next video is about responsive design. So far we've created a semantically pure HTML5 structure. We've added a CSS3 compliant style sheet, and we've abstracted our page template out into a couple of template.htmls. And we've put common configuration text into an ini file. And what's more, we've made our site compatible more or less with legacy browsers and with Internet Explorer. But our website still isn't truly responsive. So what is responsive design then? Well, once upon a time we only needed to design for reasonably modern desktops. And then designers started to realise that we needed a different design for mobiles with their smaller screens. But now the range is so great, we have desktops, laptops, mobiles, tablets, phablets, the list is endless. The range is so great that we need a different approach entirely. And that approach is responsive design. So what's responsive design then? It's a design that adapts itself to whatever size screen it finds itself on. So what does responsive design look like? Well, it should look good whether it's viewed on a wide screen, or a mobile phone in landscape mode, or a mobile phone in portrait mode, or whatever. So our mantra in responsive design is mobile first. We should aim to get it looking right on a mobile first, then we should work out how to change things for other screen configurations. If we then look at how we actually do responsive design, we split our screen widths up into groups and define each range of widths using something called @media statements in our CSS file. The mantra may be mobile first in terms of the design, but in terms of the CSS, the very first section in our CSS must satisfy legacy browsers. That's because mobile devices understand @media statements, but our legacy browsers don't. So let's follow on with our process then. The first thing to do is to decide on a maximum and minimum screen width. Now, for the sake of our example, I'm going to decide on, say, 300 pixels for the minimum width and 800 pixels for the maximum width. And they're defined first in the CSS. Then we need to decide on our breakpoints. Now, what I typically do is I tend to take 300 to 479 pixels as the minimum screen width that will suit mobiles typically in portrait mode, 480 to 599 as being a good set of widths to use for mobile phones, say, in landscape mode, and then 600 to 850 pixels as being wider screen widths up to the maximum. Now, the exact figures will depend very much on your page layout, and the examples I'm giving here assume a single column. If you have a multi-column website, then more columns typically require greater width. Having divided the design up into those different widths, I would define the 600 to 850 pixel wide display in the first block of the CSS before the @media statements. This is the design that your legacy browsers will understand. We now introduce an @media section, which will have a minimum width of 300 pixels because that's as low as we go, up to the 479 pixels before we reach the breakpoint, and we'll define anything that's different from the previous section. So we may need to just redefine one or two things that went in that first legacy browser section. Then you can do the intermediate 480 to 599 section, and lastly, why would we still need a 600 to 850 section? Well, that's because the legacy browsers are what's defined in the very first bit. We've now redefined for narrow screens and also, or potentially for medium screens, but we may need to make one or two changes for modern compliant browsers in the 600 to 850 section. So that may be blank, but it may actually require a bit of tinkering. So our next slide shows what the outline CSS will look like. So I've given a comment my responsive CSS file, and the first section is what provides the definitions for legacy browsers, everything we've got so far actually in our example that we've been developing. Then after that we have another section that provides the definitions for narrow screens, and that will be begun with a statement in our CSS that says at media screen and max width 479 px for pixels. Notice I haven't included and min width equals 300. Why? Because we've already defined that presumably in the previous section. So now we've got as far as looking at the CSS and how we define our CSS to cover the different layouts that we want for the different widths that we're going to define. However, there's one more thing that we need to do. Everything so far has been dealt with in the CSS, but we need to add a line to the HTML. And the reason for that is that this line is going to tell things like the mobile phones not to display at a tiny resolution. If we do everything we've done so far, it'll sort of work, but what we'll get on a mobile phone is a microscopically tiny display. So we need to add the following line to the head section of our what we've currently got as template top.html in our head section in our HTML. And this is a line that's a meta statement, and it's meta name equals viewport with content equal to width equals device width and initial scale equal to 1.0. It's basically saying that the device should work on the device width with a scale of 1:1 in effect. This makes no difference whatsoever in terms of the way laptops display, but it makes a massive difference in the way that mobile phones and possibly tablets display depending on their width. So it's important to get this one line in, and we just add it to the HTML in the head section as it says here. Okay, is that now everything? No, there's other things we could do. That's everything we need to do for our responsive layout on our website. But we could use at media statements, for example, to define a different layout if we're doing something else. For example, if we're printing a page out, we haven't really covered that here. We're not going to look at the details of how that's done in CSS. But for example, here's an instance of a website that has one way of laying out when you look at the page, but if you then print the web page out, it prints very differently like this. And that's done using an at media print statement. So like we've had at media different widths, we have another section in our CSS that is at media print, and everything that follows then adjusts the HTML, the CSS layout, all the borders and everything, so that when it prints out we can do things like, in this particular instance, we've removed the banner graphic and a number of other things, so it looks more like a printed document than a web page, and that can be quite handy. So now let's look at how we actually do this. We'll take this in the reverse order from the way that we have done this so far in the video, just because the last thing we've mentioned, the viewport, is the easiest thing to do. So let's have a look here at the template top.html that we've had in our previous video in step 7, and you can see the beginning of our template with the head section and the meta char set, and then straight on to link and so on. So the first thing we need to do is to add in a line in there, and we'll find that if we then add this line here, meta name equals viewport with content equals width equals device width and initial scale equals 1.0, then that will be what we need to make the display look right in our mobile displays. The next thing we need to do is to have a look at our CSS file, our webpage.css, and see what we need to do to alter that to make it responsive. Well, the first thing we do is we take the webpage.css as we had in step 7 in our previous video, video 9, and it's not a particularly complex CSS, fortunately, makes it easier to see what's going on, and we basically take that CSS and make it the first part of our CSS when we go to a responsive layout. If we look at how I've altered web page CSS for step 8, the example that goes with this video, we'll see that okay, there's a little bit of extra comment that I've put in here to help us to understand what's going on as far as responsive layout and app media statements goes on. But basically the bulk of this first block of CSS is very much what we had in our previous webpage.css for our previous example. Let's have a look at just a couple of differences. There's one bit near the top here where you can see after the max width I've added in a line that gives the min width. That's the bit that stops our display getting stupidly narrow, as I put in the comment. We want to make sure that if someone wants to reduce the width down and down and down, that we get to a point where we say, look, go make it any narrower and the display will just be stupid, so please don't do it. So we freeze it at 300 pixels in this case. Worth remembering that that is understood by modern browsers and the more recent legacy browsers, but the older legacy browsers don't understand that. So if we do care about the older legacy browsers, particularly I think Internet Explorer 7 and 8 come in that category, so not too far ago, and Internet Explorer 5 and 6 certainly don't understand that, so we need to be aware of that. So you'll find that actually there is another slight change in this section, which is because when I came to check the step 8 example, I realised that for the legacy browsers I've not done what I've said so far in the video and made the display like it would be on wide browser widths. I've made it like the intermediate widths, and I thought, why on earth did I do that? And then remembered, oh yes, I think I did that because in the legacy Internet Explorer, if you make the display rather narrower, then having 100 pixel margins left and right becomes a problem, because the text section now becomes very narrow and unpleasant to read at intermediate widths. So I just take the hit on, if you take it very wide, then the max width will kick in, apart from Internet Explorer 5 and 6, but the you won't have the margins there, but it does mean that if the window is narrower, then it's a little bit easier to read. It's not quite so unpleasant. So I've slightly changed the rules in this one. So there's a very slight change in here in that the padding has changed a bit, and we've just got padding that reflects the fact that I have a standard 15 pixel padding for headings and 30 pixel padding for paragraph text. If we then come down through our CSS, you can then see that the next section defines the very small screen width, the app media screen, and max width 480. Notice I haven't got a min width because I don't need it, because I've already defined it in the previous section. And here you can see I've made just two changes. I've changed the body text size to small, and the header H3 has a different padding going on there. So they're the only changes I need to make it more viewable on a narrow screen for this particular layout. You can also see in here that the centre section that defines the app media screen and widths between 481 and 600 has absolutely nothing in it, because this is the parallel to what I've said previously in the video about it would be like the big screen. Because this is the screen width that I've defined now for the default for the legacy browsers, it so happens that it fits perfectly for our intermediate widths on, say, a tablet or a mobile phone in landscape mode, for example. It means that I've made sure I've got things like the padding and margin right, so there shouldn't be a problem with legacy Internet Explorer and the Internet Explorer box model bug. Then we finally come down to the last section, and you can see that now I make the changes to bring in these 100 pixel wide columns left and right for the wide screen widths. So this is any width over 600 pixels, so 601 to 850 pixels, maximum width. And if you look at these, it's largely paddings you can see changing here. The header has a left text align which is needed as the layout changes a bit, but basically it's padding, and although you can't see 100 pixels in there anywhere, it's because the padding is including the fact that you've got the 15 pixel additional padding for the H3s and the 30 pixel padding for the paragraphs and so on, and the footer lines up with the headings, so that's got the 15 pixel margin in there. And that's all you need to make your site responsive.